A single mother, while helping a crying girl, met a man who carried a devastating secret. Fate brought them together at an unlikely time, but the past would exact a high price. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us from which city you are watching us following. The fog covered the city like a shroud of secrets that October morning. The airport was bustling with its usual routine of farewells and reunions, but there was something different in the air, a silent omen that hovered between the flight boards and the metallic voices of the speakers. Clara Müller adjusted her son Piero's coat for the third time, her trembling fingers betraying the anxiety she was trying to hide behind her maternal smile. At 38, her face had a discreet beauty, the kind that reveals itself more in gestures than in features. Her brown eyes, although tired, retained a glow of determination that years of struggle had not been able to erase. Her dark brown hair, tied in an unpretentious bun, framed a face that had known both love and loss. "Mom, I already know how to do it myself," protested Piero, a 14-year-old teenager who alternated between the irritation typical of his age and a tenderness that broke Clara's heart. He was the living image of his father, Antonio, who had left too soon, taken in a car accident when Piero was only 5 years old. The same crooked smile, the same way of tilting his head when something intrigued him. "I know, my love, but let your mother have this moment, okay?" Clara smiled, swallowing the lump in her throat. It was the first time Piero would travel alone, participating in an exchange program in Lyon. 3 months that seemed like an eternity for a mother who had built her entire life around her son. Her work as a nurse at the Hospital San Jose guaranteed her a modest but dignified life. The extra shifts and private consultations she provided in luxury hotels supplemented the income she needed to provide Piero with opportunities she herself never had. Every penny saved, every extra hour worked, everything converged towards this moment, seeing her son take flight. That was when the crying reached her ears, high-pitched, desperate, the kind of sound that instantly awakens the maternal instinct. Clara turned, searching for the source of the wail. Piero heard it too, his adolescent eyes suddenly alert. "Wait here," Clara instructed, following the sound until she found its source, a girl of about 6 years old, sitting alone near gate C7. The little girl was hugging a battered rag doll, her wide, frightened eyes scanning the room for something or someone. Clara approached slowly, kneeling in front of the child. Years of experience with pediatric patients had taught her the value of calculated kindness, of careful approach. "Hello, little one, is everything okay?" The girl sniffed, clutching the doll tighter to her chest. She was wearing a navy blue dress that Clara recognized as Bonpoint, a luxury brand she'd only seen in store windows on Avenida da Liberdade. Her patent leather shoes shone like tiny mirrors under the fluorescent lights of the airport. "What's your name?" Clara asked softly, keeping a respectful distance. "Sophia," the answer came in a whisper between suppressed sobs. "Sophia, what a beautiful name." "And this little friend of yours, what's her name?" Clara pointed to the doll. "Luna," Sophia replied, relaxing slightly. "Daddy went to get water and told me not to leave here, but—" New sobs interrupted the explanation. Clara nodded understandingly. "It must be scary to be alone in such a big place, right? But you know what? I'm here with you now and we'll wait for your father to come back together. How about that?" What Clara didn't notice, absorbed in her task of comforting Sophia, was the pair of eyes watching the scene from afar. Miguel Santoro remained partially hidden behind a partition in the VIP area, his face a mask of curiosity and distrust. At 43, he had learned to distrust gestures of spontaneous kindness, especially when directed toward his daughter. His tailored Italian suit and Patek Philippe watch on his wrist were just the surface layers of a life built on privilege and responsibility. As CEO of Santoro Hotels, one of Europe's largest hotel chains, Miguel was accustomed to people approaching him out of interest. His daughter, Sophia, was often the target of calculated attentions, private tutors, nannies, even other parents, all seeking a connection with the powerful Miguel Santoro. But there was something different about the woman kneeling before his daughter, an authenticity that intrigued and disturbed him at the same time. She did not have the artificial posture of the people who normally circulated among them. Her gestures were natural, her voice gentle without being condescending. Miguel watched. As Clara began to tell Sofia a story, using the doll as a character, his daughter, who was usually slow to open up to strangers, was already smiling shyly. It was as if this stranger had found a secret key to Sofia's heart, something he himself often struggled to achieve. Finally, he decided to approach. His firm footsteps echoed on the airport floor, making Clara look up. It was a moment of mutual recognition, not because they already knew each other, but because something inexplicable seemed to vibrate in the air between them. "Daddy!" Sofia jumped up, running into Miguel's arms. Clara also stood up, discreetly adjusting the hospital uniform she was wearing under her simple coat. "Thank you for taking care of her," Miguel said, his deep voice carrying a tone that wavered between gratitude and caution. "Nothing to thank you for," Clara replied simply. "Sofia is a lovely girl." It was at that moment that Piero approached. "Mum, my flight is already being announced." Clara nodded, turning her attention back to her son. "Let's go then." She offered one last smile to Sofia and a polite nod to Miguel before walking away. Miguel watched her go, noting how she hugged her teenage son with a mixture of pride and reluctance. There was a story there, several actually, written in the subtle lines around her eyes, in the way her shoulders carried an invisible weight. What Miguel didn't know, as he boarded his private flight with Sofia, was that seemingly casual meeting at the airport was just the first thread of a much more complex plot. A plot that involved buried secrets, forbidden loves, and a story that had begun long before that foggy morning in Lisbon. Clara, for her part, after saying goodbye to Piero and watching him disappear through the boarding gate, allowed herself a moment of fragility. Leaning against one of the large windows of the airport, she watched the planes take off and land, each carrying their own stories. She thought about Helena, her older sister, whose death in the psychiatric hospital on Madeira Island was still an open wound in her heart. She thought about the unsent letters she had found among her sister's belongings, about the name she had never revealed, about the love that consumed her until the end. Fate, however, has its own rules and its own timing, and on that morning, of fog and omens, he had planted the seeds of something that neither Clara nor Miguel could have foreseen, something that would begin to take shape a few days later, when a technical problem on a flight would force their paths to cross again, this time in the most unlikely place, a hotel where Clara worked shifts as a private nurse, one of the few luxury establishments in Lisbon that did not belong to the Santoro Empire. But that would be another story, for another foggy morning. The poor Hotel Palacio das Amoreiras stood imposingly against the Lisbon night sky, its windows lit like a constellation. It was one of the few luxury establishments in the city that had resisted the Santoro Empire, remaining independent thanks to a long-standing family partnership that stretched back 3 generations. For Clara Müller, it was just another place of work, another place where her skills as a nurse were called upon to care for guests who could afford private care. On that particular night, the wind was blowing with unusual force, making the hotel's ancient windows creak. Clara was finishing her regular shift at the São José Hospital and heading to the Palacio das Amoreiras for emergency care. Her small Renault Clio, purchased in easy installments, seemed tiny next to the luxury cars that occupied the hotel parking lot. The rain began to fall as she crossed the lobby, discreetly greeting Antonio, the doorman who already knew her face, from the many nights she had come to answer calls. Her hospital uniform was impeccable as always, her hair tied in a precise bun, the professional posture that years of practice had shaped. "Good evening, Donna Clara," Antonio greeted her with his characteristic smile. "The guest is in room 1507. It seems he has a back problem." Clara nodded, heading for the elevators. 15 years of experience had taught her not to ask unnecessary questions about her private patients. Many preferred anonymity, especially in an environment where discretion was as valuable a commodity as luxury. The elevator ascended silently, and Clara took the opportunity to check her messages on her cell phone once more. Piero had sent her photos of Lion, his radiant teenage face against the backdrop of the Place Bellecour. 3 weeks had passed since his departure at the airport, and each photo, each text message, was a balm for her mother's heart, which was still adjusting to her absence. The elevator doors opened on the 15th floor, and Clara walked down the hallway decorated with gold and dark red wallpaper. She located room 1507 and knocked softly on the door, announcing herself. "Nurse Clara, Mola Private Care." The door opened and the world seemed to spin in slow motion. There before her stood Miguel Santoro, no longer in his impeccable airport suit, but in a partially unbuttoned white shirt, his face etched in an expression of barely contained pain. The recognition was mutual and instantaneous. "You," he said, his voice husky with surprise and something else Clara couldn't identify. "Mr. Santoro," she replied professionally, maintaining her composure despite her inner turmoil. "May I come in?" Miguel stepped aside, allowing her to pass. The room was one of the presidential suites, a large space decorated with understated elegance. A Louis Vuitton suitcase sat partially open on a sofa, and papers strewn across the desk indicated an unplanned stay. "I didn't expect to find you here," Miguel commented, closing the door. "The world is smaller than we imagine." "Or Lisbon is smaller than it looks," Clara replied, keeping her tone professional. "Are you having back problems?" Miguel nodded, shifting in visible discomfort. "An old injury that usually bothers me. It's not usually this bad, but today—" "Please sit." "On the edge of the bed. I need to assess the affected area." Clara watched as he obeyed, noting the stiffness in his movements, the way his breathing changed with each change of position. Her years of experience allowed her to read pain in the smallest details of the human body. "How is Sophia?" she asked, as she began examining his back through his shirt. The mention of his daughter seemed to soften something in Miguel's expression. "Okay. He talks about you sometimes, about the nice lady at the airport who played with her and Luna." Clara smiled, her professional hands identifying the tension points. "I'm going to need you to remove your shirt so I can make a proper assessment." Miguel hesitated for a moment before he began to unbutton his shirt. Clara noticed an old scar near his right shoulder, the kind of mark that suggested a story she didn't dare ask. "It's a severe muscle contracture," she diagnosed after a few minutes of examination. "I can help with some therapeutic massage techniques and some exercises, but you should see a physical therapist for longer-term treatment." "I don't have time for physical therapy," Miguel replied, his voice betraying a strain that went beyond the physical pain. "I need to look presentable tomorrow. I have an important meeting." Clara began to apply the massage techniques, her fingers finding the knots of tension with expert precision. The silence in the room was broken only by the sound of rain against the windows, and Miguel's occasional ragged breathing as she touched a particularly sensitive spot. "Do you mind if I ask why you're staying here?" I thought. She hesitated. "That I would stay in one of my own hotels," Miguel added, a slight hint of irony in his voice. "Sometimes we need distance, even from the things that belong to us." Clara continued her work in silence, noticing the layers of meaning in that answer. There was something vulnerable about Miguel at that moment, something that his impeccable suit and authoritative posture usually hid. "Sophia told me you're living in Lisbon now," Clara commented after a few minutes. "It must be a big change for her." "Yes," Miguel replied, his voice softer as he spoke of his daughter. "After your mother, after the divorce, I thought a fresh start would be good for both of us. The company's headquarters have always been here anyway." Clara noticed how he avoided elaborating on the divorce, how his muscles tensed slightly at the mention of another untold story, another secret kept between the lines of a formal conversation between a nurse and her patient. A particularly loud clap of thunder caused the lights in the room to flicker. Clara was finishing her massage when the power went out completely, plunging the room into darkness. Only the occasional flash of lightning illuminated the space, creating dancing shadows on the walls. "Don't worry," Miguel said, his voice oddly close in the darkness. "The generator should be up and running in a few minutes." Clara began to put her things away in her bag, her movements guided more by muscle memory than by sight. Her hands found something unexpected, an envelope that shouldn't have been there. Even in the dim light, she recognized the handwriting. It was one of Helena's letters, which she had recently found among her mother's belongings and had begun to carry with her, like a talisman from a past she had yet to decipher. The generator failed to start. The storm seemed to have caused some serious damage to the hotel's electrical system. Clara could hear voices in the hallway, people moving around, the usual chaos that comes with a power outage in a luxury hotel. "I think I'd better go," she said, rising. "You must rest, and tomorrow—" "Clara," Miguel interrupted, using her first name for the first time. His voice had a different tone in the darkness, more personal, less controlled. "Stay. At least until the light comes back. The storm is too strong to leave now." She hesitated. All her professional experience told her to refuse, to keep her boundaries clear. But there was something else going on here, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. An echo of unlived memories, of untold stories, of secrets that were beginning to emerge from the shadows like night flowers. "Okay," she finally replied, sitting down in an armchair near the window. Lightning continued to illuminate the city. Outside, transforming Lisbon into an impressionist painting of light and shadow. What neither of them knew at that moment was that that stormy night would only be the beginning. The envelope in Clara's bag, with its familiar handwriting and its dormant secrets, was a silent time bomb, waiting for the right moment to reveal truths that would forever change the destiny of those two souls that chance, or was it destiny, had brought together in a dark suite at the Hotel Palacio das Amoreiras. Darkness has the power to strip people of their social masks, to turn strangers into confidants, to make time flow differently. Sitting at opposite ends of the presidential suite at the Hotel Palacio das Amoreiras, Clara and Miguel discovered this ancient truth as the storm continued its private show over Lisbon. "What's it like to be a nurse?" Miguel's voice came from the darkness, surprisingly soft. "Seeing people at their most vulnerable?" Clara shifted in her chair, considering her answer. "It's eye-opening. Pain, whether physical or emotional, has a way of stripping away all our defenses. In that moment, it doesn't matter who you are out there, a CEO, a teacher, a housekeeper. We're all equally human, equally fragile." A flash of lightning briefly illuminated the room, allowing Clara to see Miguel nod thoughtfully. He had put his shirt back on, but left it unbuttoned as if social protocol had dissolved along with the electricity. "Sophia asks about Piero sometimes," he said, changing the subject. "She remembered him from the airport. She said he had a kind smile like yours." Clara felt an inexplicable heat rise up her neck. "Piero has this gift of making friends easily. He takes after his father in that regard." "Father is no longer—" Miguel left the sentence incomplete, a delicate question floating in the darkness. "No," Clara replied, her voice steady despite the old pain. "Car accident, 9 years ago. Piero was only 5. The silence that followed was filled with the sound of rain against the windows. Clara realized that it was the first time in a long time that she had talked about Antonio with a stranger, except that Miguel, somehow, no longer seemed like a stranger. "And Sophia?" she allowed herself to ask. "Her mother?" "She's in New York," Miguel replied, a hint of bitterness in his voice. "Beatrice decided that her career as an art curator was more important than a family. The divorce was finalized 2 years ago." Clara thought of Sophia, of the little girl at the airport with her battered doll. How many children had she seen in the hospital, carrying the weight of adult decisions on their little shoulders? "Sometimes. I wonder," Miguel continued, his voice lower as if he were sharing a secret, "if I'm doing the right thing, bringing Sophia to Lisbon, taking over as president of the group here, leaving behind a lifetime in London. Children are more resilient than we imagine," Clara replied, thinking of Piero. "And sometimes a fresh start is exactly what we need." Another flash of lightning illuminated the room, and Clara noticed that Miguel had approached, sitting in a nearby armchair. His perfume, a sophisticated blend of woods and spices, reached her, provoking an unexpected reaction in her body. "You seem to know a lot about starting over," he observed. Clara thought of Helena, of the letter in her purse, of the secrets she carried without knowing it. Maybe. Or maybe I've just learned that some stories need to be buried so that others can blossom. And what stories did you bury, Clara Muller? The question hung in the air like smoke, thick and intoxicating. Clara felt her heart race, not at the question itself, but at the way her name sounded on his lips, like a caress, like a secret. All the ones that needed to be buried, she replied, her voice huskier than she intended. Including my sister. It was as if the air in the room had frozen. Clara hadn't planned to mention Helena, but something about that darkness, that intimacy forced by the storm, had lowered her defenses. Your sister? Miguel's voice sounded strange, strained. Helena, Clara said, and the name seemed to echo off the walls of the suite. She died 5 years ago in a psychiatric hospital on Madeira Island. We never knew exactly what happened. She was fine, or at least she pretended to be fine for a long time. And then, a particularly loud clap of thunder made her stop in her tracks. When she spoke again, her voice was more controlled. I'm sorry. I don't know why I'm telling you this. Sometimes, Miguel said after a long moment, the stories we thought we had buried find a way to come back to the surface, like plants growing through concrete, reaching for the light. Clara felt a shiver run down her spine. There was something in the way he said it, an underlying tension that she couldn't quite decipher. Before she could respond, the lights flickered to life, flooding the room with sudden brightness. The spell was broken. The mask of professionalism returned to Clara's face like a second skin. Miguel also seemed to recover, buttoning his shirt, with fingers that trembled slightly. I should go, Clara said, standing up and gathering her bag. The envelope with Helena's letter seemed to burn through the fabric. Of course, Miguel replied, his voice again controlled, distant. Thank you for your service, Mrs. Muller. Clara walked to the door, but before leaving, she turned around. One last time. You're back. Apply ice for 20 minutes before going to sleep, and try sleeping on your side, with a pillow between your knees. Miguel nodded, a half-smile playing on his lips. Always the professional. Always, she replied, and stepped out into the now-lit hallway. In the elevator, Clara allowed herself a moment of weakness, leaning her forehead against the cold mirror. What had happened in that suite? What kind of ancient magic had the darkness conjured, making her lower her defenses like that? What she didn't know, as she drove home in the fading rain, was that Miguel Santoro stood in his suite, an untouched glass of whiskey in his hand, his eyes fixed on the city that stretched out beyond the windows. In his mind, a name echoed, like a ghost, Helena. Because there were things Clara didn't know. Things about her sister, about the past, about the man who now drank alone on the 15th floor of the Hotel Palacio das Amoreiras. Things that were about to emerge from the shadows, like plants reaching for the light through concrete. And it would all begin with a letter, sleeping silently in the bag of a nurse who had just discovered that some stories refuse to stay buried. I've been working for the Santoro family for over 30 years, Donna Eugenia continued, her voice low as a confession. I was there when it all happened, when your sister and Miguel... Clara felt the blood run cold in her veins. The letter in her hands suddenly felt as heavy as lead. What? They met in 2018 during a charity event at the Santoro Hotel in Madrid, the housekeeper continued, her eyes lost in memories. Helena was a violinist. She had been invited to play at the opening of the event. Miguel was still married to Beatrice at the time, but the marriage was already just a facade. When he saw Helena play, something changed in him. I had never seen Miguel look at anyone that way. Clara closed her eyes, memories flooding her mind. Helena, on the phone, whispering about a man she had met, her eyes shining with a happiness Clara hadn't seen since her parents died. The sudden trips to Madrid, the secret phone calls, the smile she tried to hide. Why are you telling me this now? Clara asked, her voice shaking slightly. Because I saw the way he looks at you, Donna Eugenia replied simply. It's the same. To look, and because there are things you need to know. about what really happened to your sister." The housekeeper pulled a yellowed envelope from her bag, her hands shaking as she handed it to Clara. "Helena gave this to me before the end. She made me promise that I would only give it to her sister if Miguel and she ever met. I didn't believe that was possible, but when I saw them at the airport..." Clara picked up the envelope, as if it might burn her fingers. Inside was a letter and some old photographs. In one, Helena was smiling radiantly next to a younger Miguel, the two of them in front of a cafe in Madrid. The love between them was palpable even through the faded paper. Miguel's father, Eduardo Santoro, found out about the relationship, Donna Eugenia continued. He was a cruel man, obsessed with the family's reputation. He threatened to destroy Helena's career, to expose secrets that would harm not only her, but her entire family. Miguel tried to protect her, but Eduardo had too much power, too many connections. Clara remembered the last year of Helena's life, the anxiety attacks, the constant fear, the strange phone calls in the middle of the night, the hospitalization on Madeira Island. It was Eduardo who arranged everything, Donna Eugenia confirmed, tears shining in her eyes. He used his connections to force the internment, claiming that Helena was mentally unstable, that she was stalking her married son. Miguel only found out when it was too late. And he never tried to look for us, explain? Eduardo kept him under constant surveillance. He threatened to take Sofia away from him if he attempted any contact. When Helena, the housekeeper's voice trailed off, when she died, Miguel entered a state he had never seen before. That was when he began to plan his silent revenge against his own father. Clara opened the letter with trembling hands, immediately recognizing her sister's handwriting. "My dear Clara, if you are reading this, it means that somehow fate has put you and Miguel on the same path. I know you must be confused, maybe even angry, but I need you to understand. What I felt for Miguel was the most true and devastating love I have ever experienced, and what he felt for me was just as real. Don't blame Miguel for what happened to me. Eduardo Santoro is the only one responsible for the destruction he caused in our lives. Miguel fought for me in the only way he could, but against the empire his father built. We were just two people trying to hold the ocean in our hands. If you've met Miguel, I know you've probably noticed, he carries a loneliness that mirrors your own. A pain that recognizes your pain. You're more alike than you think, little sister. Maybe that's why fate decided to bring you together. Don't let the past poison what could blossom between you. Some stories need to end so others can begin, and perhaps through you our love can find a way to redemption. With all my love, Helena." Clara let the tears run freely down her face, decades of unanswered questions finally finding meaning. Donna Eugenia placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Miguel doesn't know I'm here," the housekeeper said softly. "He still carries so much guilt, but when I see him with you, I see a chance for healing. For all of you." In the hospital garden, under the golden light of dusk, Clara felt the weight of the past and the promise of the future converging in her heart. Somewhere in the Hotel Palacio das Amoreiras, Miguel Santoro was probably looking out the window of his suite, carrying his own ghosts, his own unspoken truths. And between them, like an invisible thread weaving past and present, was Helena's. Love and no longer a buried secret, but a bridge to something new, something only time could reveal. The truth has a weight of its own, a gravity that alters the orbit of all who enter its field of influence. In the days that followed Donna Eugenia's revelation, Clara felt this weight with every breath she took, with every step she took through the corridors of Hospital San Jose, in every moment of silence in her empty apartment. The photographs of Helena and Miguel had become her private obsession. Late at night, when sleep eluded her, she studied them like a detective searching for clues to an unsolved crime. Her sister's smile, more radiant than she had ever seen in her life. The way Miguel looked at her, with a devotion that transcended the static image. It was on one of those sleepless nights that his phone vibrated with an unexpected message. "Sophia is not well. I need you. Mess." The clock read 11:47 p.m. when Clara crossed the lobby of the Palacio das Amoreiras, Antonio, the doorman, simply nodded in acknowledgement. Her presence at that hour was no longer a novelty. In the elevator, Clara tried to calm her racing heart. Ever since Donna Eugenia's revelation, she had consciously avoided Miguel, switching shifts at the hotel whenever possible. But Sofia was different. The girl was not to blame for the ghosts that haunted the adults around her. The door, in a suite 1507, opened before she could even knock. Miguel was barefoot, his dress shirt wrinkled, his hair disheveled in a way that made him look strangely more human. "She has a fever," he said without preamble. 39.2 degree. I've already given her a fever reducer, but... Clara followed him into the adjoining room where Sofia lay, her small face flushed with fever. Luna, her inseparable doll, lay beside her like a silent guardian. "Hi, little one," Clara whispered, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Not feeling so well, are you?" Sofia opened her eyes, a faint smile lighting her face. "You really came? Daddy said you would." Clara began her examination with smooth, professional gestures, aware of Miguel's intense gaze on them. "Of course. I came. I couldn't leave my favorite patient alone, could I?" As she examined Sofia's throat, Clara noticed the characteristic spots. "Tonsillitis," she diagnosed. "We'll need antibiotics. There's a 24-hour pharmacy nearby." "I'll go," Miguel offered immediately. Can you stay with her?" Clara nodded, surprised by the vulnerability in his voice. As soon as Miguel left, Sofia grabbed his hand. "He was worried," the girl said with the peculiar wisdom of children. "I've never seen Papa like this before. He always knows what to do." "Sometimes," Clara replied softly, "even parents need help." "That's okay. Piero told me about his father," Sofia continued, her voice weak with fever. "About the accident. He said you were sad for a long time, but then you became strong again." Clara felt her throat tighten. "Did Piero say that?" "Yeah. He said you're the strongest person he knows, like a superhero, only real." Sofia coughed lightly. "Daddy's strong too, but in a different way." "In a sad way." The girl's insight struck Clara like a well-aimed arrow. Yes, there was a sadness in Miguel, one she recognized because it mirrored her own. A sadness that now had a name, a face and a history that intertwined with her own in ways she was still trying to understand. "Did you know you look like someone?" Sofia murmured, already starting to fall asleep. "There's a picture, in Daddy's office at home, of a girl playing the violin." Clara froze, but Sofia had already fallen asleep, her breathing gradually slowing down. For long minutes, Clara remained there, holding the girl's small, warm hand, feeling the weight of generations, of loves lost and found, of the chances that fate sometimes offers disguised as coincidences. Miguel returned almost an hour later, carrying not only the medicines, but also tea and some fruit. He found Clara sitting in an armchair next to Sofia's bed, absent-mindedly leafing through a children's book. "Did she sleep?" he asked quietly. "Yes, the fever has gone down a bit." Clara stood up, keeping her voice professional. "I'll leave the instructions about the medicine and—" "Clara," his voice stopped her. "Please, don't go yet." There was something in his tone, a veiled plea, a vulnerability she'd never noticed before, that made her pause. Miguel walked over to a small bar in the corner of the suite, pouring 2 cups of tea. "We need to talk," he said simply, offering her one of the cups. Clara accepted the cup, her fingers brushing lightly against his as she transferred it. "And see." Involuntary shiver ran down his spine. "About Helena," she said, not a question but a statement. Miguel closed his eyes for a moment, as if the name had physically struck him. When he opened them again, there was a new determination in his gaze. "About Helena," he confirmed, "about the past, about us." The word "we" hung in the air between them, laden with unspoken meaning. Outside, Lisbon slept beneath a sky of hidden stars, unaware of the drama unfolding on the 15th floor of the Hotel Palacio das Amoreiras. A story of love and loss, of redemption and second chances, was about to be rewritten. The silence between them had a texture, a density, an almost physical weight that filled the presidential suite like mist on a winter morning. Clara held her teacup in both hands, more for support than out of any real interest in the drink. Miguel stood by the window, his silhouette silhouetted against the night lights of Lisbon. "I met her on a night like this," he began finally, his voice low as a confession. "Helena was nervous before the performance. I found her in the garden of the hotel in Madrid, rehearsing alone. The sound of her violin, it was as if she were talking directly to the stars." Clara closed her eyes, the image so vivid it hurt. Helena had always had this habit, rehearsing outdoors, letting the music flow as if it were part of the very air she breathed. "She never told me your name," Clara said softly. "In the letters I found, she only referred to you as M. But she talked about the music, about how for the first time someone was really hearing her play." Miguel turned to her, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "I listened to her, in every way possible. Helena had a way of seeing the world that made me question everything I believed in. All the structures my father had built around me began to crumble." "Why didn't you ever come to us?" The question escaped Clara's lips before she could stop it. After it happened." "Cowardice," he replied, with brutal honesty. "Shame, guilt, take your pick, they're all true and none of them are enough." He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "When I heard about her death, I was in the middle of a shareholders' meeting in Hong Kong. My father made a point of breaking the news to me right there, in front of everyone. It was his way of showing that he had won." Clara felt anger rise in her chest, not just for Helena, but for all of them. For lives manipulated like pieces on a corporate chessboard, for love suffocated in the name of a reputation that was worth more than human hearts. "Eduardo Santoro died 6 months ago," Miguel continued, pouring himself a shot of whiskey. "Pancreatic cancer. By the end, he was lucid enough to understand that he was losing everything. I had begun to systematically dismantle his empire, transferring shares, reorganizing the board. He died knowing that I would destroy every pillar he had built with fear and manipulation. Is that why you're in Lisbon, continuing your revenge?" Miguel gave a bitter smile. "Revenge? Maybe at first. Now I don't know. When I saw you at the airport with Sophia, something changed. It was like the universe was giving me a second chance that I didn't deserve." In the next room, Sophia stirred in her sleep, mumbling something unintelligible. Clara automatically got up to check on the girl, her instincts as a nurse and mother overriding everything. "Else, the fever has come back a little," she said after touching Sophia's forehead. "I'll prepare another fever reducer." Miguel watched her care for his daughter with a gentleness that made his heart ache. It was the same gentleness he had seen in Helena, not a weakness, but a strength he never truly understood until it was too late. "Do you know what's ironic?" he said when Clara returned to the room. "Sophia and Piero connecting like this without knowing anything, as if fate were laughing at all our attempts to control things." "They are children," Clara replied softly. "They do not carry our ghosts, our guilt. Perhaps they can teach us something about that." Miguel approached her, stopping only a few feet away. The air between them felt electrified, charged with possibilities and unspoken fears. "Clara," he began, his voice hoarse with emotion, "I know I have no right to ask you for anything, that you probably hate me for everything that happened to Helena, but I need you to know, I need you to understand." "I don't hate you, Miguel," she interrupted, surprising herself with the truth in her words. "Maybe I should, but I don't. Helena, she chose to love you even knowing the risks. She's always been like that. Heart first, consequences later. Like you," he said softly, taking another step toward her. "No," Clara shook her head. "I'm different. I've always been the cautious one, the responsible one, the one who thinks twice, 3 times before acting, the one who—" Her words were interrupted by the gentle touch of Miguel's fingers on her face, a gesture so delicate it could have been imagination. But it wasn't. It was real, like the heat emanating from his body, like the perfume that enveloped her, like the tremor in her own hands. "Miguel," she whispered, a warning or a plea she herself did not know. "Tell me you're not," he he murmured, his eyes fixed on hers. Tell me there isn't this current between us. This inexplicable thing that started at that airport and keeps growing. Tell me I'm crazy, that I'm seeing things where there aren't any, and I promise I'll never... Clara didn't let him finish. With a move that surprised them both, she covered his hand on her face with her own, intertwining their fingers. The contact was like an electric current, awakening every nerve, every cell in their bodies. I can't say that, she replied, her voice barely a whisper, because it would be a lie. The world seemed to stop at that moment, suspended between one heartbeat and another, and then, as if moved by a force greater than themselves, their lips met. It was a soft, hesitant kiss, full of unasked questions and answers yet to be discovered. A kiss that carried the weight of two different stories converging at a single point in time. When they broke apart, they were both shaking. Clara could feel the tears on her face, hers or his, impossible to tell. Guilt and desire fought in her chest like wild animals. This is crazy, she whispered, but didn't pull away. Maybe, Miguel replied, his forehead resting against hers. Or maybe it's the only thing that's made sense in a long time. In the next room, Sophia slept peacefully, oblivious to the unfolding drama. In Lyon, Piero was probably dreaming of his own adventures. And somewhere, Clara liked to think, Helena was smiling, not with bitterness or sadness, but with the understanding that love, true and deep, always finds a way back to the surface, even if through other souls, other hearts, other stories. The morning brought with it a merciless brightness that illuminated not only Lisbon, but also the complexities of the situation Clara and Miguel found themselves in. Sophia had improved, her fever finally breaking under the effect of the medication, but the same could not be said for the emotional storm that was stirring in the hearts of the adults. Clara had spent the night at the hotel, alternating between checking on Sophia and trying to maintain a professional distance from Miguel, a task that had become increasingly impossible after the kiss they had shared. Now, with the rising sun painting the sky pink, she prepared to leave, gathering her things with hands that still trembled slightly. You don't have to go, Miguel said from the doorway, his voice hoarse from a bad night's sleep. We can have breakfast, talk more about... I can't, Clara interrupted him gently. I have a shift at the hospital in 2 hours, and besides... She hesitated, searching for the right words. We need to think clearly about what's going on here. Before Miguel could respond, his phone rang. She watched him answer it, noticing how his posture changed instantly, shoulders tense, jaw clenched, the CEO replacing the vulnerable man she'd met the night before. Laura is coming to Lisbon, he announced after hanging up, rubbing his hand over his face in a weary gesture. She wants to discuss the terms of our agreement. Laura. The name hung between them like a storm cloud. Clara knew from hotel gossip that Laura Al-Rahman was Miguel's fiancée, an arranged marriage that would benefit both their families. What she didn't know until that moment was how the mention of that name would make her heart contract painfully. I see, she said, keeping her voice neutral. Well, all the more reason for me to leave. I left the instructions about Sophia's medication with Donna Eugenia, and... Clara, Miguel interrupted, closing the distance between them in 3 long strides. It's not what you think, Laura and I... It's complicated. Complicated? Clara laughed humorlessly. Miguel, everything about this situation is complicated. You're engaged. I'm the sister of the woman you loved and lost. Sophia and Piero are developing a friendship that could be destroyed if we... She gestured between them, unable to find the right words. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made them separate abruptly. Donna Eugenia entered the room, carrying a tray with Sophia's breakfast. The girl is better, the governess announced, casting a meaningful glance at them both, but perhaps it would be wise to call a doctor for a more thorough examination. That won't be necessary, Miguel replied, his voice regaining its usual controlled tone. Mrs. Muller took care of everything perfectly. Clara took the opportunity to grab her bag and head for the door, but Sophia's voice stopped her. Are you leaving? The girl stood in the bedroom doorway, still in her pajamas, Luna tightly hugged to her chest. "But you promised you'd tell me more stories about when Piero was little." The innocent request struck Clara like an arrow. How can you explain to a child that sometimes adults need to walk away, even when their hearts beg them to stay? "Another day, dear," she promised, forcing a smile. "Now you need to rest and take your medicine properly." "But what if I get sick again?" Sophia insisted, her eyes wide and pleading. "Who will take care of me like you do?" Miguel intervened, kneeling beside his daughter. "Sophia, Mrs. Muller has other patients who need her. We can't be selfish." Clara watched the interaction between father and daughter, feeling her heart ache. There was so much love there, so much need for connection, and yet so many invisible barriers separating them all. "I have to go," she said finally, her voice firmer than she felt. "But if you need anything—" "We always will," Miguel replied, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her stomach turn. In the elevator, Clara allowed a few tears to escape. Her phone buzzed with a text from Piero, a photo of him smiling in front of Lion Cathedral, his crutch visible at his side. "I'm better now, Mom, and guess what? Sophia told me you took care of her yesterday. You guys are like healthcare superheroes." The innocence of the comment made her smile through her tears. If only he knew. If either of them knew how. The past and present were intertwining in ways she could barely comprehend. In the hotel lobby, Antonio greeted her with his usual kind smile. "Mrs. Clara, this arrived for you last night." He handed her an elegant envelope, the heavy paper marked with the Santoro Hotel's letterhead. Inside, a handwritten card. "Engagement dinner. Miguel Santoro and Laura Al-Rahman invite you to celebrate. Your commitment. Amoreira's Palace Hotel, Saturday, May 20th, 8 p.m. And below, handwritten in the handwriting she already recognized as Miguel's. "Please come. We need to finish our conversation. There are more things you need to know. M." Clara put the invitation in her bag, next to Helena's letters, feeling the weight of all the untold stories, of all the loves interrupted and started again. Outside, Lisbon woke up to another day, unaware of the drama unfolding within its ancient walls, in the intertwined lives of people whom fate insisted on bringing together, even when everything seemed to conspire to keep them apart. The days leading up to the engagement dinner dragged on like an eternity, condensed into moments of anguish and anticipation. Clara threw herself into her work at the hospital with an almost feverish intensity, accepting extra shifts and consciously avoiding any calls from the Hotel Palacio das Amoreiras. But news, as always happens in Lisbon, had a way of finding her even when she wasn't looking for it. Laura Al-Rahman had arrived in the city like a whirlwind of elegance and mystery. The gossip papers were talking about nothing else. The beautiful Arab heiress, educated in Paris, with a PhD in art, history and a renowned gallery in New York. The photos showed a stunning woman, with almond-shaped eyes and an enigmatic smile that hid more than it revealed. "You have to see this." Mariana, one of the hospital's nurses, showed a news report on her tablet during lunch break. Apparently, Santoro's fiancée brought a special friend with her, a French pianist. Everyone is speculating about the real reason for this friendship. Clara feigned disinterest, but her heart raced as she read between the lines of the report. The photos showed Laura always close to a woman with short hair and a delicate face, Camille Dubois, a dame prodigious pianist at the Paris Conservatory. In the looks they exchanged between them, there was an intimacy that no headline dared to name explicitly. At home, alone with her thoughts, Clara reread Helena's letters obsessively, looking for clues, connections, anything that could help her understand the emotional maze she found herself in. It was on one of these nights that her phone rang, Miguel's number flashing on the screen like a warning light. "Clara," his voice sounded tired on the other end of the line. "We need to talk, not over the phone. Can I come over?" She hesitated, looking around her modest apartment in Bairro Alto, the thin walls that let in the sound of music from nearby bars, the simple furniture chosen with such care over the years, the photographs of Piero at different ages, a world so far removed from the luxurious suites and gilded salons that Miguel inhabited. "It's not a good idea," she finally replied. "Please," he insisted, "there are things you need to— a note before dinner tomorrow. Things about Laura, about the deal we made." "Miguel," she interrupted him gently. "I don't need to know. In fact, the less I know, the better. You have your life, your obligations, your world, and I have mine. Is that what you really believe? That our worlds are so separate?" His voice held a challenging tone. "Then why? Can't you stop thinking about me, just as I can't stop thinking about you?" The question hit Clara like a punch in the gut. How did he know? How could he put into words something she barely admitted to herself? "Because we're both broken people," she replied after a long silence, "looking for fixes in all the wrong places. Or maybe," he suggested softly, "we're exactly the fix we needed to find in each other." Clara closed her eyes, letting the tears flow freely. "Miguel, please." "Open the door," he said simply. His heart stopped. "What?" "Open the door, Clara." "I'm here." As if in a dream, she walked up to the door of her apartment. Her hands shook as she turned the key. And there he was, Miguel Santoro, CEO of a hotel empire, engaged to an international heiress, standing on her small landing with nothing but vulnerability in his eyes. "As Donna Eugenia," he explained with a half-smile. "She always knows. Everything." Clara stepped back, allowing him to enter. Miguel looked out of place in her small apartment, like a Renaissance painting in a modernist gallery. And yet there was something oddly right about seeing him there, in her personal space between her memories and her present. "Laura is in love with Camille," he said without preamble, sitting down on the worn sofa. "Always has been. The marriage, it's just a facade. To protect her from her family, to keep up the appearances our worlds so demand." Clara sat in the opposite chair, processing the information. "And you? Did you agree to this?" It seemed to make sense at the time. Two broken hearts pretending wholeness to the world, but then— he looked at her intently. "Then I met you at the airport, and for the first time in years, I felt something real, something that didn't need a facade or protection." "Miguel," Clara began, but he interrupted her, rising to kneel before her. "I know it's crazy. I know there are 1,000 reasons why we shouldn't give this a chance. Helena will always be part of our lives, of our stories. But maybe she brought us together for a reason. Maybe all this time, all this pain, was just the path we needed to take to find ourselves." Clara felt her heart beat so hard she was sure he could hear it. Miguel's hands found hers, and the contact was like electricity coursing through her veins. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I'm not going to marry Laura, that she and Camille are going to Paris after dinner. Tomorrow. A dinner that will turn into a farewell, not a celebration. I'm saying that I'm tired of living in the shadows of what my father built, of what society expects, of what fear has made me accept." He brought one of his hands to her face, wiping away a tear that Clara hadn't even realized had fallen. "I'm telling you that I love you, Clara Muller, and if you'll give me a chance, I promise to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that love." The sound of the city outside seemed to have disappeared. The entire world had been reduced to that moment, to that small apartment in Barro Alto, to two people whom fate had broken and reassembled, just so they could find each other and recognize each other in their own fractures. The main hall of the Hotel Palacio das Amoreiras was ablaze with the light of hundreds of candles, transforming the historic space into something out of a modern fairy tale. The greatest fortunes of Portugal and the Arab world were mingling in a cocktail of power, influence, and social expectations. At the center of it all, Laura Al-Rahman stood resplendent in a champagne-colored Valentino gown, her exotic beauty drawing all eyes. Clara watched from the entrance to the ballroom, feeling out of place in her navy blue dress, the best she had been able to buy with her savings, but still clearly simpler than the haute couture creations that surrounded her. Piero, who had returned from Lyon especially for the event, stood beside her, elegant in his first suit. "Mom," he whispered, adjusting his tie for the 10th time, "why are we even here?" Before Clara could respond, Sophia came running in, her pink tulle dress fluttering like butterfly wings. "Piero, Clara!" The girl hugged them both with equal enthusiasm. "You really came. Daddy said you would come, but I was afraid that—" "Sophia," Donna Eugenia's voice sounded gently reprimanding, "remember what we talked about running in the hall?" The housekeeper smiled at Clara, a look of understanding passing between the two women. In the last few weeks, ever since, the night Miguel had shown up at her apartment, Donna Eugenia had become a silent ally, a guardian of secrets that could not yet come to light. Mrs. Muller, a melodious voice with a slight French accent, surprised her. Laura Al-Rahman stood before her, even more impressive up close. "What a pleasure to finally meet you. Miguel speaks highly of you." Clara felt her face heat up. "Mrs. Al-Rahman, Laura, please," the woman interrupted with a genuine smile. "And this must be Camille," she continued, indicating the approaching French pianist. The two women's eyes met with an intimacy that reminded Clara of Miguel's words about the true reason for that dinner. "Clara," Miguel appeared beside Laura, impeccable in his tuxedo. "Can we talk in private for a moment?" She followed him to a side balcony, leaving Piero engaged in animated conversation with Sophia about his adventures in Lyon. The evening air was scented with jasmine, and the view of the illuminated city stretched as far as the eye could see. "Everything is ready," he said quietly. "Laura and Camille will leave for Paris tonight, immediately after the announcement. The documents dissolving the agreement have already been signed." Clara felt her heart race. "Miguel, are you sure?" "I've never been so sure of anything in my life," he interrupted her, taking her hands in his. "But before that happens, there's something you need to see." He led her down a side hallway to his private office in the hotel. On the antique mahogany desk was a picture frame she had never noticed before. Helena, beaming with her violin, the Amoreira's palace in the background. "Shida played here once," Miguel explained softly. "A private recital before everything. Before my father." His voice trailed off. "I've kept this photo all these years as a reminder of what fear and cowardice can cost." Clara touched the photograph with trembling fingers. "She looked so happy." "She was happy," Miguel confirmed, "and she deserved much more than I could give her at the time, but you, Clara—" He turned to face her. "You made me understand that sometimes love gives us a second chance, not to fix the past, but to build a different future." The sound of glasses clinking in the hall reached them, followed by voices rising in anticipation. It was time for the announcement. "Come with me," Miguel asked, extending his hand. Clara hesitated for a moment, taking one last look at Helena's photo. For an instant, she could have sworn her sister's smile had become softer, more understanding. Back in the ballroom, the buzz of conversation was silenced as Miguel stepped onto the small makeshift stage. Laura stood beside him, radiant in her exotic beauty. Camille from the front row watched her with barely concealed adoration. "Dear friends and family," Miguel began, his voice steady despite the tension visible in his shoulders, "you have been invited tonight to what was supposed to be an engagement announcement." A murmur ran through the crowd. "However," he continued, "what we are really celebrating is something far more valuable. The courage to be true to yourself and to those you love." Laura stepped forward, intertwining her fingers with Camille, who had stepped onto the stage. The gesture, simple yet powerful, caused a wave of shocked whispers among the guests. "Laura and I discovered," Miguel continued, "that sometimes true love doesn't follow the paths society sets for us. Sometimes it surprises us. It challenges us. It forces us to question everything we thought we knew." His eyes met Clara's in the crowd, and the world seemed to disappear around them. "Tonight," he concluded, "we celebrate not an engagement, but rather the liberation of hearts that have long lived in the shadows. Laura and Camille leave. Tonight for Paris, where they can live their love freely, and I—" He paused meaningfully. "I have finally found the courage to follow my own heart." The chaos that followed was predictable. Camera flashes, raised voices discussing the scandal, press representatives rushing to make the first headlines. But in the midst of the confusion, Clara could only see Miguel coming down from the stage toward her, his eyes fixed on hers as if nothing else in the world mattered. "Now do you understand?" he asked when he reached her. "Why did it have to be this way? Why did it have to be you?" Clara felt tears stream down her face, but for the first time in a long time, they were tears of joy, of liberation, of possibilities. "Yes," she whispered, allowing him to pull her into his arms in front of everyone. "Now I understand." Sophia and Piero watched the scene hand in hand, identical smiles on their young faces. Donna Eugenia, discreet as always, wiped a tear from the corner of her eye. And somewhere Clara was sure Helena was smiling, no longer like a ghost from the past, but like a guardian angel who had helped weave the threads of destiny so that two broken hearts could find each other and together discover that sometimes love is greater than any story we try to write for it. The spring morning dawned over Lisbon with an almost liquid light, golden as honey. Clara watched the city awaken from the balcony of her new apartment in Príncipe Real. No longer the small refuge in Barro Alto, but a large and welcoming space that she had chosen with Miguel, a place that perfectly blended their two worlds. "I still can't believe we did it," Piero said, joining her on the porch with a cup of hot chocolate in his hands. At 15, he was getting taller and taller, looking more and more like his father, but his eyes held the same kindness that Clara had always cultivated. "What? The move or everything?" she asked, putting her arm around her son's shoulders. "Everything," he replied with a smile. "Sophia finally having a sister, us having a bigger family, you and Miguel. It's like the pieces just fell into place, you know." Clara knew exactly what he meant. The last year had been a journey of discovery, adaptation, and unexpected joys. After the scandal of the non-engagement, as the press had dubbed it, Miguel had completely transformed the structure of the Santoro hotels. Laura and Camille, now openly living their love in Paris, remained business partners, but the company had become something different, more human, more focused on people than profits. The sound of children's laughter filled the apartment. Sophia and Maria, the little Syrian refugee they had adopted 6 months earlier, were running down the hallway on yet another of their morning adventures. Maria had arrived through one of the Santoro Hotel's new social projects, a program for fostering refugee children that had been Clara's idea. "Slow down, girls." Miguel's voice came from the kitchen, where he was trying with characteristic determination to make pancakes. The smell of burnt batter suggested that his attempt was not going very well. Clara smiled, remembering how everything had changed. She was still working as a nurse at São José Hospital. She had flatly refused Miguel's offer to leave her job. "It's who I am," she had said, and he had understood perfectly. But now she was also running the newly created Helena Muller Foundation, dedicated to bringing music and art to public hospitals throughout Portugal. "Mom!" Sophia appeared on the porch, her eyes shining with excitement. "Dad's destroying the kitchen again. I think we need professional intervention." Maria followed close behind, her big dark eyes dancing with joy. In just 6 months, the girl who barely spoke Portuguese had transformed into a tireless chatterbox, filling the house with her stories and her dreams. "Let's go save your father." Then, Clara laughed, following the girls into the kitchen. Miguel stood in front of the stove, a look of absolute concentration on his face as he tried to flip a pancake that looked like a work of abstract art. Flour stained his expensive t-shirt, and there was even batter in his hair. "Don't say anything," he warned when Clara entered, but his eyes were bright with amusement. "I almost got it this time." "Of course, love," she replied, gently taking the spatula from his hands. "But how about leaving breakfast on me today? We have a big day ahead of us." It was true. That afternoon, the Helena Muller Foundation would open its first music room at the São José Hospital. The space, decorated with photos of Helena and equipped with instruments donated by musicians from around the country, would be a place where patients could find comfort through art. "I can't believe it's been a year," Miguel commented, hugging Clara from behind as she expertly prepared new pancakes. "Sometimes it feels like it was just yesterday that I first saw you at the airport." And "Sometimes it feels like I've known you forever," she replied softly. The children had migrated to the living room, where Piero was trying to teach Maria to play a few notes on the violin that had belonged to Helena, the same one that Clara had found among her sister's belongings, carefully preserved all these years. "Donna Eugenia called earlier," Miguel said, stealing a bite of pancake. "She insists that we need to make a special dinner for Laura and Camille when they come to the opening of the new hotel in Cascais next month." Clara nodded, thinking about how life had curious ways of weaving its stories. Laura and Camille had become great friends, their regular visits to Lisbon always bringing a wave of joy and stories of their adventures in Paris. "You know what's funny?" she said, turning in Miguel's arms. "Helena always said that true love had the power to heal not only the person who experiences it, but everyone around them. At the time, I didn't really understand what she meant. And now? Now I know she was right. Look at us, you, me, the kids, even Laura and Camille. We've all been healed in some way by the love we found in each other." Miguel kissed her softly, the gesture full of promises fulfilled and others yet to come. Outside, Lisbon continued its eternal romance with the Tagus, the morning sun transforming the river into a carpet of diamonds. In the living room, the sound of Helena's violin, now in Maria's small but determined hands, mingled with Sophia's laughter and Piero's patient instructions. And there, in that kitchen with the smell of burnt pancakes and freshly prepared love, Clara finally understood what her sister had always known, that love in its infinite forms and manifestations was the only force capable of transforming losses into gains, pain into healing, endings into new beginnings. Helena was gone, but their love lived on, not just in memories or old letters, but in every violin note that echoed through the house, in every smile Sophia gave, in every hug Clara and Miguel exchanged. It was a love that had transcended death, time and destiny itself, to unite hearts that might otherwise never have met. And that, Clara thought as she surveyed her unlikely but perfectly suited family, was the greatest miracle of all.